First of all, let me say thank you to each and every one of you for being a part of this R&R group, this Reinvention and Resurrection group. And I also want to begin with an apology to those of you who have already seen this presentation either at the church council or at the annual meeting or possibly at both. Some of you have not seen it, and so I'm hoping that it will be helpful to all of you, even if you've seen it or not. I think that we need to start thinking about a new direction for First Congregational Church. It's a new direction, but in some ways it's an old direction, and I'll say what I mean more about that a little bit later on, and you also can see it in Michael Piazza's book. We're at a crossroads these days. Now, we've been here before. There was the Palm Sunday tornado that hit our church back in 1920 and wreaked so much damage. There was the rise of the baby boom generation after the Second World War, and so many people came into our church that we had to build a whole new educational building. Then there was the transition from downtown Elgin, and when so many churches moved out to the west side, but our church decided to stay, and I think we're justly proud of that. But now we're facing a new crossroad. Let me begin by showing you some national trends. This chart is a little old, but it does show you the demographic, the change in adherence to mainline denominations, of which the United Church of Christ is one, over the last few decades, starting with 1940, showing you how all the mainline denominations, including ours, have been losing membership precipitously. And this chart stops at 2000, but I can tell you that the numbers have continued to go down in the years since then. So that's nationally what's happening. But more importantly, we have what's called the rise of the nones. One of the reasons why mainline churches have been losing members, and quite frankly, not just the mainline, it's happening in evangelical churches and others as well, is the rise of those people who claim no religious affiliation whatsoever. You'll notice that in 2001, the numbers of folks who claimed that they had no religious affiliation at all stood at 15%. By 2011, 10 years later, that number had risen to 22%. Now, these are folks, they're not necessarily atheist, but they just don't want to have anything to do with quote-unquote organized religion or the institutional church or whatever you want to call it. It's significant because this is where the trend is heading. You'll notice that the next to the last line down there are that older millennial generation, those born between 81 and 89. In 2007, they were 25% of their number claimed no religious affiliation at all. By 2014, that number had risen to 34%. So you can see where the trend is going. Among the younger millennials, those born between 90 and 96, we don't have data for them for 2007, but we do know that in 2014, 36% of them said that they had no connection to any religious group whatsoever. So what about Elgin? Well, I think you'll find these numbers interesting. We have lots of churches in Elgin, plenty of them surrounding us in downtown, but notice the largest percentage of people in Elgin, 48%, claim no religious affiliation at all. So even though we like to call ourselves the city of churches, nearly half of our population claims no connection to any religious body whatsoever. Now, are we immune from these trends here? Well, let me preface what I'm about to show you by saying that we're a very strong congregation. We're doing okay. There are a number of pastors I know who would give their eye teeth to be in the position that I'm in as pastor of this church. So we're doing all right. I don't want this to sound like, doom and gloom, but I do want to show you some statistics that I think let us know that what's happening is not sustainable in the years to come. Our age demographics, the breakdown that we have in our congregation. Notice that the largest percentage, 36% of our congregation, is over the age of 60. Then the next largest group is 20%. That's the 40 to 59 crowd. So well over half of our congregation is over the age of 40. Now remember what I just showed you a moment ago in terms of the millennial generation, the younger and the older millennials, those who are in that 20 to 35 or so age range. Those people are not interested in church all that much. And so if we don't do something to change things here at First Congregational, we don't have a sustainable model for the days to come. If over half of our congregation is made up of people who are going to be gone in the next few years. Let's look at our children and youth and the demographics that are there. We have a sizable number, 27% of our youth and children are in high school, which means that that's the group that's going to be gone before too terribly long. Then we have 16% of our youth and children are in elementary school. We only have 1% in the middle school age group. And we have a sizable preschool group. 28% of them are in that age range, which is hopeful, which is a great thing. But again, if we don't begin to bring in more of that particular age group, not the children, the parents of those children, and the children will come along with them, we don't have a sustainable model for the future. Let's look at our new additions. So I looked at the new people that we have brought in over the last 3 years, and 56% of them have come from elsewhere. They've come from other churches, that sort of thing. But notice that 44%, nearly half of the new members that we have welcomed in over the last few years, have been our own confirmands, which means that nearly half of our new additions are simply our own children. And again, that's not a sustainable model. Look at the folks the new people we have brought in, not the confirmands, but the new members. 48% of them are in the 40 to 59 age range. 32% of them are over 60. And only 20% are in that 20 to 39 age range. Again, not a sustainable model. Plus, we're losing stalwart disciples, mostly due to life changes. We tend to think about people leaving the church because they get mad or something like that. But we've lost a lot of people in the last few years just because of life changes themselves. There are Dale and Betty Ells, whose health will just simply prevents them from coming anymore. There's Jeff and Beth Iverson. They moved away and bought a house that they're renovating into a bed and breakfast in Lake Geneva. There's Darius Garcia and her family. She fell in love and moved off to the wilds of Virginia. There's Walt and Carol Kilmanis. They moved off to be closer to family in Minnesota. And then, sorry to say that the Paynes are going to be leaving us in late summer, early fall, so that they can move and be closer to family as well. However, there are young adults who are returning to church, or who are open to church if they can relate to church in some kind of a meaningful way. This is the Virginia Highland Church in Atlanta, where the author of your book, Michael Piazza, is the pastor. It was a church that had gotten down to about 24 people. They had no money. The building was falling apart. And Michael Piazza said that he would come and be their pastor if he could use them as a kind of a laboratory for how to reinvent a church. And he came in there, and now they're running around 150 or so average in worship on a Sunday. This picture was taken on last Easter when the congregation was spilling out onto the steps after the service. And if you look, you'll notice most of the people in that congregation are young adults. The very group of people who, by statistics, are not being all that much attracted to the church, but yet somehow or another this church is attracting them. So what should we do? Well, one option is to just assume that my poor math skills mean my numbers are all wrong, and that's an option. Or option two would be to keep doing church the way we've always done church and just hope for the best. On to option three. I just want to remind you with these photographs of these companies who are not around anymore. Did you ever think that these companies would fold up? Well, they did. They've gone the way of the dodo. They had grand histories, and we have a grand history as a church, but we don't want to end up like them. So option three is to reinvent First Congregational Church of Elgin. Now, by way of example, I've shown you two photographs here. The one on the left is the Christmas tree that Penny's family used every year when she was growing up. Now, we all know what these trees look like, and there's a story that goes with this one that I'll be glad to share with you sometime. But we all know that after a while, these kinds of Christmas trees became so unpopular that you just couldn't give them away. People thought that the only folks that had Christmas trees like this had, cars up on concrete blocks in their front yard. However, these Christmas trees have become trendy again with that very same young adult crowd because they have a respect for the past and things that come out of the past as long as they can relate to them in ways that they understand in this modern world. The photo on the right is the picture of the telephone system that Penny and I have in our house now. I thought that we had to have a landline in our house because of the size of it, but I found out that no, that wasn't the case. And so I was able to buy this phone system and put it in to the house. It's very easy to hook up. All it does is connect to my cell phone and Penny's cell phone by a Bluetooth connection. We have extensions all over the house. It works like a regular old-fashioned telephone, but yet there's not a landline connected to it. Again, this is what Michael Piazza means when he talks about vintage church. It's the old that's become new, and it's the new that has a connection to the old. That's what this younger generation of adults is looking for. They want something tied to the past, but they want to be able to relate to it in ways that they can understand. So, how should we reinvent ourselves? Well, the specifics are still being determined about all of this. But I want to say, first of all, that what we do should not just be a recommendation from myself or from Lois. What we do should come from you, the congregation, with guidance from Lois and myself, but this should not be a top-down enterprise. Well, Paris and Lois figured this out, and somehow or another we got to implement it. No, this needs to come from you. That's why we're doing this church-wide study of vintage church by Michael Piazza, and that's why you're in this R&R group, a reinvention and resurrection group during the season of Lent. Hopefully, out of all of this will come a group that, for lack of a better term right now, I'm calling a discerning, visioning, shepherding group that will help us to run ideas past one another, that will kind of guide us through this whole process. But whatever shape the reinvention takes, it's going to have to involve the following elements. First of all, a willingness to try, a willingness to take risks, a willingness to think outside the box, and a willingness to accept failure as well as success. Failure, I think, is one of the things that scares us the most in the church. But the only way we'll know what will work is to try some things that don't work. And then we can go back and say, all right, well, let's figure out what will work. So we need to take risks. We need to have a willingness to try new things. And we need to think outside the box. We need to ask ourselves two questions. First of all, what's distinctive about First Congregational Church now? What is it about us right now that could be attractive to a younger generation? And then secondly, what should be distinctive about us? We need to figure out who our target audience is in the Elgin community, because there are always things that we can be doing. There are always people that we can reach, but we need to decide what should be distinctive about us. What are we not doing now that we could be doing? What do we not offer now that could be offered in the days to come? And most importantly, we need to move from seeing ourselves as guests to hosts, from consumers to producers. In other words, to stop seeing ourselves as those who need to be fed and start seeing ourselves as those who can feed others. How many times have you heard somebody say, well, I stopped going to that church because I wasn't getting fed? It's a legitimate argument. But by the same token, my experience has been that I feel most fed when I am helping to feed others. Now, I'm talking about community service here, but I'm talking about much more than community service. This is a change in mindset. We're going to have to shift from, well, this is what I like, to what will reach out to young adults in our community. And the scriptural basis for this, I think, is pretty clear. Mark chapter 10, Jesus said, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." And then finally, we need a sense of urgency. This is something that can't wait. It's an endeavor that God is calling us to right now. And so I want to thank you again for your involvement in this group and your willingness to give of your time and your talents and your heart to this church we all love so very, very much. God bless you.